going to work. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining DataCon LA 2020. Welcome to the Business Intelligence Reporting and Use Cases track. And soon we'll be listening to Quantifying Genuine User Experience in Virtual Desktop Ecosystems sessions with Wendy Howard. I am Ozzy Tarula, your host, and our co-host today is Michelle Ifiola. We'll be moderating the chat and Q&A on the WOBA app during the session. Today we have our guest, Wendy Howard, and she will be talking about quantifying genuine user experience in virtual desktop ecosystems. With over 10 years of performance analysis experience in both Windows and Unix worlds, Wendy works with customers to fix their issues within enterprise infrastructures. Without further ado, I'll hand this over to the speaker. Thanks for being here, Wendy.
Thanks for having me, Ozzy and Michelle. And thank you, DataCon, for inviting me to share my wealth of knowledge. Don't be intimidated by the title. It's basically just a fancy way of saying monitoring and understanding user experience. My background is in performance, and I work for a company called EG Innovations. So I am passionate about performance monitoring and data. Data in general, sometimes it's very specific data. And in this case, we will go through how user experience can be measured in virtual environments. And so just to clarify, what I mean by virtual environment is a way to deliver virtual apps and desktops to users. So like all of our work from home people today, how is their sessions? How are their virtual desktops performing? And we'll take a look at that and dive in. Let me get started. This is the agenda for today. We have a dilemma. We have a lot of people working from home, working remotely, and we need to figure out, how to make them quote unquote happy. 73% of businesses report that, slow application performance and poor user experience is what caused productivity loss. So we need everybody to be able to connect in remotely and be productive. And then 98% of user experience problems rely on multiple parts of the IT infrastructure. So I'll be going over those multiple parts of the virtual environment and the challenges that we experience today as administrators and performance analysts. And then I'm going to give you my definition of user experience. And then we're going to actually calculate it and give you like a formula. And then ways to just make improvements for your user base. Okay, so what's happening in the world today is server admins are providing remote access to desktops and applications in a virtual environment. And then the users are unhappy. They might be calling the help desks and complaining about poor performance. And the reason that this is so difficult is because virtual environments are very complex and they're hard to monitor. What we're also seeing lately is this loss of productivity. If there's slow is the new downtime is what the saying is in performance land. And you're losing not only revenue, but productivity. So the virtual environments that I'm talking about, in general, let's say you have virtual desktops on top of the environment. They're sitting up here, they have an application layer and an operating system layer. Doesn't matter if it's Windows or whatever. And then underneath that is a hypervisor. Now, this could be a desktop or an application. doesn't matter. This could be vSphere or any hypervisor, Hyper-V, Zen Server, HCI, Nutanix. And then the host, underlying host could be any host, right? But in general, what we need to know is how is the user experience across these virtual desktops and these virtual apps? Are the logins slow? Are the launches slow? Is there a session disconnect? How much resources are these users taking up? All of these factors are going to play into our measuring of user experience. So that's looking at the inside of their desktop or application usage. We can also talk about what it looks like from the hypervisor level. Why do we care about that for user experience? Well, according to this picture, all of their resources are sitting on top of the hypervisor. So there's a big dependency amongst these parts of the system, which means that performance jokers are everywhere. Anything can impact a user. And so what happens is it becomes critical, mission critical for a lot of companies to watch and keep an eye on the performance of those digital workspace ecosystems in order to be successful. So what does one of these virtualization architectures look like? I'm going to show you a picture, but I don't expect you to read it because you'll see what I mean. So I put the three most popular ones up on the screen today: Citrix, VMware, and Microsoft. And when we look at the Citrix architecture, they've got the users on the left side, and then accessing all of the applications or desktops involves, 10 different types of systems in this screen. We're not even going to dive into that. I just want you to see how much is involved. And then for VMware, they have their users at the top here using different types of clients. And then again, there's another, 10 different types of systems involved. Microsoft is a little bit easier to digest because they're in the cloud, they're in Azure. If you have your clients on the left side, they access their virtual desktop, WVD, through the firewall. It gets brokered through Azure, and it's a little more hands-off because Microsoft's doing a lot of the servicing. Whew, that's a lot of information. So what do they all have in common? They're just big pieces to a puzzle that we really don't have time to put together, right? And dissect and then put back together. But what people are trying to do today is calculate user experience in all the wrong ways. So let's look at some of those ways that people are doing it incorrectly, and then I'll show you what I feel is the correct way. Trouble tickets. So people file a support ticket and say, my desktop is slow. A lot of the times they don't know what they're saying. They don't know what the problem is. It's a user's term saying it's slow, or it's just glitchy. They'll make up all kinds of words. It kicked me out. My cursor wouldn't blink, things like that. Just counting those tickets is not a way to calculate your user experience. Support calls, usually counting support calls is not a good thing either. I mean, you can get 100 support calls and they're all for different things, but they might have a tag word in there that says user experience, and then you're counting all the wrong things. Emotional data. So if you've ever been to a restroom that has a little kiosk on the way out that has a little button that you push that says, how was your experience today in the restroom? Push this button if you were happy and push this button if you were sad about it. It's exactly what emotional data is. It's calculating what people think of as like thumbs up, thumbs down. That right there is not going to get you any improvements in user experience. And then downtime percentage. Downtime percentage of your systems is not a direct correlation to how happy your users are. It's a separate metric and needs to be treated separately for sure. All right. So now let's take a look at different parts of the user experience. If I'm this person and I'm working remotely, I might have some thoughts in my head like, my cursor seems slow. This is when I'm having poor experience, right? And then I start to worry, can I log in to work quickly today, or is it going to take 5 minutes? This application is moving very slowly. And then another thing they might be having trouble with is freezing. The application or the virtual desktop is freezing. Well, all of these types of questions actually map directly to metrics. So we have specific metrics now that we can measure to see how happy this person, well, to determine how their experience was that day during their session. I'll never say how happy anybody was. You never know. So we have latency, response times, bandwidth, and logins. And I'm going to go through each one and then show you how to combine them to create an actual like equation for the user experience. So the very first one here translates to round trip time. My face just got really pale because of the screen is really white. I'm not a ghost, I swear. Round trip time is one of the biggest factors in performance issues. According to a study a few years back by Citrix, the network connection to the user terminal was the biggest reason for performance issues. And that's that network latency, AKA round trip time, can cause loss of productivity. Things just start to slow down. They just start to give up and throw their hands in the air. It indicates, this particular metric indicates the latency experienced by the user when transmitting and receiving data over their connection. And the rule of thumb would be to keep latency below 250 milliseconds. And that way it's not, I guess, you can't really determine it as a user. If it's longer than that, you start to notice it. And for more aggressive SLAs, you keep it under 150 milliseconds. Next, we're going to look at response times. And what I mean by response time is that time between when the user's taking action, like I'm clicking on the mouse to go to the next slide, and I want that next slide to be immediate, right? But if the response time, if it's not immediate, then my response time is high. So the time that I click on it to the time that it appears on the screen. There's a lovely performance guru, Tango Whiskey 37 at GitHub, that says response times by itself mean very little and do not provide anyone a good view of what the system performance looks like. One has to look at response times in conjunction with other performance quantities. So yes, it's a good number, and it will become useful in our equation for user performance. So the response time is the wait time plus the queue time inside of a system. And this can be for an application, virtual desktop, or server. You also want to keep that around 250 milliseconds or lower. This is that latency for any protocol you're using whether it's remote desktop, PCOIP, Blast, ICA, whatever that user is using, doesn't matter. You should be able to measure that. And the company I work for, again, is called EG Innovations. We have a product that will measure all of these latencies and round trip times and just make life easier so we don't have to script anything anymore. Next, we have bandwidth. And it's important to track bandwidth on each interface and by user. If your user is taking up all the bandwidth in your infrastructure, you need to know. You need to know the percentage of usage that they're taking up. So it's important to track individual users and then also combine those as well in your intranet. You know, there really is no good indicator of a bad bandwidth or a good bandwidth. You basically just know what the value is, right? Because then what you have to do is look at that measurement in conjunction with the other two metrics that we just talked about. But here's the thing where it comes in really handy. If the bandwidth usage is low, they're not doing anything, but the latency is high, then that's an indicator there's a problem with the end user's network resulting in poor user experience. So that's one good use of seeing your bandwidth usage and comparing it to latency. And then another part of the user experience is logging in, right? We all have to do it every day, no matter what we're working on the computer. We're either logging into our physical laptop or something virtual offsite that our company has provided us so we can get to the resources we need. And so every virtual environment has their own steps during a login, but they usually come down to 4 phases: initialization, authentication, profile, and policies. So they all have to do those things. And sometimes they're in parallel, which makes it really tricky to understand what's happening in the login time. And then we have key performance indicators, which are called KPIs. The Logon KPI, I'm just going to read this lovely quote from James Rankin. He's a Citrix Logon guru. You can go to james-rankin.com and check him out. The Citrix Logon KPI deals with the time that it takes from when a user sits down in front of a device, submits their credentials for authentication, to the time when they can effectively start to use the system. But there's a bunch of steps along the way. And this is an example of the Citrix Logon process broken down into a dozen different steps. But to generalize it again, we've got the 4 phases: initialization, authentication, profile loads, and policies. When you start looking at user experience or user logins, the best thing to do is gather metrics for that start to finish, and then find ways to get metrics for each of these phases. Because what you're going to find is one of these takes longer, and that's where you would start to improve your user logon times. EG Innovations actually has a simulator, and I would highly recommend trying to use a logon simulator for your environments. You can always reach out to me and I'll tell you how this works. We break down each step of that login and tell you how long each takes, just like we were looking at in the previous slide. So we just saw 4 parts of the user experience. And logons are kind of a separate beast. You're going to use that logon data to, you're going to manage it a little different, keep it separate. But these 3, round trip, response times, and bandwidth, we're going to consider all of those together. Bear with me, I have to flash through some slides. So here's a nice little slide review. Oh, okay, I went back too far. So now what you can do is you can combine those 3 metrics and come up with a connection quality. How good is the user's quality? Is it poor? Is it weak? Is it strong? And then you can start classifying your users based on this connection quality. And in this case, we have a strong bandwidth, we have a very poor latency, but a strong round trip time. And that's going to give us a poor user connection. So you can create classifications however you want. I just set up weak connection is bandwidth is greater than this, latency is less than this, and round trip time is less than this. And then you can create, your strong connection values. And the recommendation actually comes from Citrix. On the endpoint, Citrix has a connection quality indicator tool that you can run, but you shouldn't have to. It's just going to it's just going to flash in people's corner of their screen and say your quality is poor. But what we do at EG is actually do this automatically for you, and we can calculate all of those 3 metrics together. So this type of calculation is what you would use to combine and get that user connection or that user experience value. Or is it good? Is it bad? And then you know exactly why it's good or bad. And then you can justify all of the work that you've done. You can justify calling back users and telling them it's not our system's fault. There's a problem on your side. And that just seems to be the most common issue that administrators have today with these virtual environments. They need to be able to get the data, use it, arm themselves with it, and go back to their user base and say, our systems are fine. And here's why. I've got a couple more slides, and then we'll probably wrap it up here. I've got a little tips and tricks here. Do's and don'ts of monitoring your user experience. So do monitor end to end. And that's that picture of the end user on the left side with their client all the way to the end of the back end server side. Do keep monitoring TOMA. TOMA means top of mind awareness. You need to keep performance on the top of your mind, in front of your plate, because if you don't, then you'll be in constant reactive state. Do get regular reports, and that's part of keeping monitoring top of mind, and review them. Do own up and speak up. So that means that if you get a report and it's because you made a change and it's looking terrible and maybe you affected the login times, don't just retract the change. Actually take that data and show your team and say, look, this is what we did and we need to learn from this and figure out how to do it better. Consider latencies and bandwidth usage. And we just saw why that's important. Okay, don'ts for monitoring user experience. Don't ignore the data. Sometimes data just becomes noise, right? I think maybe you just need fancier graphs, easier to digest things that show you what the data means, and it'll make life easier. Don't blame other teams for poor performance. At my last job, we used to have a wheel of blame, and we'd spin it, and then whatever team it would land on, it was their fault that there was a outage or a performance problem. Don't hide incriminating data, because your institution is going to learn from your mistakes, and everybody's human. So I don't think you should take it personal when your systems are slow. And don't look at isolated metrics. I mean, you can, but for user experience, it's a combination of metrics to help you understand them. So to sum it up, user experience is a sum of its individual parts. And so that means you should use a connection quality equation as well as user logon data. Consider performance across all users. It's a very common thing nowadays when somebody is investigating an issue. Is it happening for one user, groups of users, or all users? Use a tool like EG Innovations for automatically calculating that connection quality, and then try to keep those logins under 30 seconds. And I think your users will be very, very happy. And with that, I'm just going to throw a few slides of the EG Enterprise product. We work very close with Horizon and their virtual desktop offerings and monitoring those. We also work very close with Citrix, monitoring their applications and virtual desktops. And with that, I was wondering if there were any questions on a Friday evening.
Thank you, Wendy, for that presentation. There are a couple questions. One question is, I think we would like your feedback on those three different virtual platforms, right? How do you decide on which one to go? Which one do you recommend? Just your general high view of those three products that you presented. What's the difference between them? And then very high level. And again, maybe you can make a recommendation of which one to start with for better performance. Do you have any feedback on that?
For better performance, wow, that's a good one. I think it would depend on virtual apps versus virtual desktops. And what we're seeing for virtual apps right now is that Citrix is kind of the leader. And then for virtual desktops, I've seen a lot of customers be really happy with the VMware version. The Windows, the WVD, the Microsoft one, is so new that we still haven't really grasped the performance around that. We need more use cases to measure it.
One more question. What is your, which one is, I don't know how to phrase this, heavier on the user system, right? I know some of them are larger to install, require more memory to run. Which one is the lightest, would you say, or the best performing in that sense?
The lightest for the client side?
Yes. Client.
Oh, that's a good question. I just think that Citrix is pretty heavy because they expect you to build out a server for your applications, and that's a heavy footprint, and it's a dedicated machine. For virtual desktops, it's a lot smaller footprint, and there's a lot less going on. You just build out the virtual desktops. Like in VMware, you can actually quickly and easily clone out your VDI environment. So it just depends again on apps versus desktops.
And one more question. Was there a like other systems took because of COVID, people working from home? Was there a significant delay or did it affect these systems? In the first couple of months when everyone kind of rushed to these systems, or was that not an issue at all?
You know, um, our company has talked with a lot of people since March, and these customers had the infrastructure in place, and then what they had to do quickly was, I guess, expand out. They had to really quickly build more machines and allow more access remotely. So yeah, I think that the customers did have some struggle with that, but once you get these systems added on and scaled out, then they're done. You just have to get your users working again.
I see. And one, I think, last question: are these virtual systems used mainly by companies, corporations, or do you see them being used by educational institutions or organizations, or are they mainly kind of corporate used?
No, they're used, yeah, they're used by educational systems, hospital systems, anywhere you want to have less, you want to deal with less applications installed on somebody's machine, and you just want to stream it out to them. And that, yeah, every classroom not every classroom, but lots of classrooms will use that, especially in universities. And then the healthcare, I used to actually work at a hospital as a Citrix admin, and we had our main EMR system through Citrix pushed out to clinicians. So, yeah.
Okay, I don't think I have any other questions. Unless anyone else has any questions, I think we'll wrap this up. Thank you, Wendy Howard, for your presentation, and I appreciate all the attendees for the questions and interactions during this session. Please contact the speaker if you have further questions regarding this topic. Please provide your comment and feedback to us or the organizers on the community board to start a discussion there to connect with others in the DataCon LA 2020 community. Thank you for joining today's presentation. I hope you can gain some insights from this session. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for being part of this year's DataCon LA. Thank you, Wendy.